Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it may be as you're watching this video. For this week's readings, I wanted to briefly cover a few of the aspects of what we're going to be talking about. So this week, when it comes to ethics, we're talking about basically two separate issues here. Talking about ethical relativism. Right? Ethical relativism, in a nutshell, explains that there's no one consistent or objective right and wrong that can be applied to all of humanity, all people, in all times. There are situations that are specific to different cultures, different groups, different types of groups within a culture. So we cannot say that there's one right and one wrong. And one of the benefits of this view is that it helps us reach across cultural borders, cultural divisions. So from one country to another, or even within a country or a nation or a continent, it helps us reach across different cultures and understand that what I may consider to be ethically right, the ethically right thing to do in a situation, may not be what somebody else considers to be ethically right. And I need to have some respect for the ethics of somebody in a different culture with a different point of view. Now, the negative of that is that we can fall into the trap of thinking, well, there's no right and wrong, period. It's all completely up to the individual. Now, that is a perspective that some may take, and you may take that perspective. And if you can argue that point well, then you're in good hands. But the difficulty is that there are certain aspects of right and wrong that each of us takes that even when we think it's just us individually, we're still conditioned in some sense by our upbringing, our background, as we discussed last week. We are conditioned by different aspects of our life. And so there is some sense of right and wrong that is shared by people within a culture, and there's aspects of right and wrong that are shared by people across different cultures, different backgrounds, different viewpoints. So those are some of the benefits and maybe some of the weaknesses of ethical relativism. Now, the other aspect that we'll be discussing in the readings this week has to do with egoism and altruism. So briefly put, egoism is a point of view that that says that what's really important is what's important to me. So in making my ethical decisions, I should make those decisions based on what's right for me, based on my own personal interests. Now, the textbook identifies two different aspects of what you would call egoism. Now, it identifies psychological egoism, which is the thinking behind what is called ethical egoism. Now, ethical egoism talks about what we ought to do, right? That's what ethics is primarily about. What should we be doing? What should we consider to be right, and what should we consider to be wrong? So, when we're talking about egoism, and specifically ethical egoism, what we consider to be right and wrong is decided by what is right for me. So, there's two aspects even to ethical egoism, right? One says that I ought to look out for my own interests. I ought to look out for what's best for me. And that's what we might call individual egoism. Universal egoism says that I ought to look out for others only when it's in my own interest, my own best interest to do so. So I shouldn't just go around looking out for the needs of others and for looking out for what's best for others at all times. I should only do that when it's good for me, when it's the right time for me, when it's in my own best interest. So one of the aspects in which this egoism is applied, even argued for the benefit of this point of view, has to do with economics. Now, most of us, especially in the United States of America, we are grounded in what's called laissez-faire or laissez-faire capitalism, or a free market economy. And I'm not an economist by any stretch. Some of you may be better grounded in this than me, but basically, in a nutshell, what laissez-faire capitalism says, which was argued by Adam Smith, is that when we seek out our own personal happiness, we actually benefit other people. And unless we're motivated by self-interest, we are not going to be motivated to get up and work, to get up and do things that in the end are actually going to benefit others, that are actually going to benefit society as a whole. So, for example, when I'm not teaching, I work for a company called Lowe's, which many of you are probably familiar with. This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that seeks to help people with home improvement projects, to provide all sorts of services and products for the home. And as we say at Lowe's, we want to help people love where they live. Now, that sounds all very good, and there's some good motivations there. But when it really comes down to it, Lowe's as a corporation is driven by the bottom line, right? What is our profit? How much money are we going to make? Right? No matter what the commercials may show, no matter what kind of catchy phrases they come up with, they want to make money. And they're motivated by that need to make money. Now, there are more than 2,000 stores throughout the country and other parts of the world, Lowe's stores specifically. Each store is out to make as much money as it can. Each individual store is trying to be the most profitable store that they can be. So if my store is trying to make as much money as it can, and it succeeds in that, making lots of money, that benefits the company as a whole. And that benefits other stores, because we all benefit from being in a profitable company, from being in a healthy company. Right? That comes back to us as employees and the benefits we receive from that company. So the more money that each store makes, the better for the company, the better for the whole, the better for everybody. So in that sense, there's a very positive sense in which egoism can actually be beneficial to everybody and not simply focused on itself. So as I like to summarize it, egoism, the better for me, the better for you. The better for me, the better for you. Right? So from this perspective, egoism is actually benefiting other people, because by looking out for my own best self-interest, I am helping and profiting other people as well. Now, a bad example of egoism would be when my daughters are fighting over a doll. Right? I've got two daughters, and if they both want the same baby doll, they're going to fight over it, and both of them wants it. Each of them is looking out for their own self-interest, but they're arguing, they're fighting, and they might end up destroying that doll fighting over the thing because they're looking out for their own self-interest. Now, on the other hand, the ethical perspective of altruism seeks to benefit other people first, or as I like to summarize it, the better for you, the better for everyone. Better for you, the better for everyone. The better for me, the better for us all. Now, in the example I just shared, my daughters are fighting to get what they want individually, what each person wants. Now, if they took an altruistic point of view, one daughter would be willing to sacrifice to give up that doll to make her sister happy. Okay? And that's a good thing. We would generally accept that as being something good. But the downside to that is that altruism does not always result in my own happiness. In fact, I may become an extremely unhappy person because I'm constantly giving up what I want in order to help and benefit somebody else. So if my daughter is giving up her doll to her sister all the time, she's not going to be happy because she never gets what she wants. Now, there are other perspectives on that, and you may have some thoughts on what really is going to make us happy. Each of you probably would have perspectives on what's really going to make us happy. Does seeking out what we want for ourselves, what we think we want for ourselves, does that truly make us happy? Or are there other things that make us happy? Now, to go back to my example about Lowe's, if each individual store in Lowe's took an altruistic point of view, in other words, they said, if my store said, I'm not going to look out for the best thing for my own store, I'm going to start sending business to our other stores. We've got other stores not too far away. I'm going to start sending all our business to those other stores. And man, those other stores are going to be so profitable. They're going to be so successful. It's going to be so great. And those other stores may get a lot more money. They may be way more profitable, and they may benefit from that for a time. But what's going to happen is my store is going to go bankrupt. My store is going to go out of business. And then you're going to have more than 100 employees out of work. And that's going to be harmful for the company, because while I may be sending some business their way, other stores, Home Depot is going to start benefiting from my store closing. Other stores are going to benefit from my store closing. And it's not going to be the best thing for the company as a whole. Now, those other stores may be perfectly happy. Other companies may be perfectly happy with that, and they may benefit. But my store, my company, is not going to benefit. Well, when we look at any ethical argument, there's three aspects that we need to consider when we consider how sound an argument is being made. And in this class, what I'm most going to want to focus on is not, are you presenting an ethical viewpoint that I agree with or that your classmates agree with? That's not my focus. My focus is, can you reasonably and with good evidence, with good support, can you argue for a particular ethical perspective? Or can you take each ethical point of view and argue for the benefits and the weaknesses of each one, and can you do that well? All right. Well, one of the ways that you can argue well for one ethical perspective over another one is by taking into account something that our textbook actually addresses. And it identifies three types of reason, right? So reason in argumentation is very important when it comes to ethics. Now, the first aspect is what we call motive. Motive. So, you're all familiar with motive, probably understand what I'm talking about there. But motive has to do with my own personal, what drives me as an individual or as a group. What drives a group of people, a culture of people, a nation of people? What drives us? What drives me? What's the motivation behind acting in a certain way? What's my motivation for saying that this decision, this act, is more ethical than this one? Right. So from this point of view, you would evaluate an ethical argument based on how good or bad the motive is. So, for example, if you take a woman who is driven by a motive to do something in her business practices, she is driven by the motivation to do what's ethically right. So she tries to sell only fair trade coffee because it's going to benefit people. It's going to be the best for the farmers. It's the most ethically right way to go. And she only sells fair trade coffee because she is motivated by a desire to help the farmers and the people who produce this coffee. She wants to do what's right, what's ethically right, and that is her motivation. She's not driven just by a motive to make money. She's driven by a motive and an ethic that wants to benefit as many people as possible. So she is driven, she's motivated to sell fair trade coffee and believes that is the ethically right thing for her to do. Right? So you can see from that perspective that is a good motive. So she can defend, or you could even defend her ethical decision to sell fair trade coffee based on her motive. She has a good motive. She wants to benefit other people, not just make money. Now, the second aspect of good reason has to do with act, or an action, right? So, this fair trade woman, she has a good motivation. She has a good motive. That's what makes her ethic. Excuse me. That's what makes her action so ethically strong. But some people may decide that what's important when we're making an ethical decision is not just our motive, but what the actual action is. So consider um, the Abu Ghraib scandal back in 2006. Many of you may remember this. There were pictures spread all over the TV of American soldiers doing these horribly humiliating things to the prisoners that they were overseeing. I mean, putting them in just horribly graphic and demeaning positions and situations. They had them on leashes and um, naked and just horrible things. And nobody was standing up. Well, not very many people were standing up saying that, oh, they were driven by a good motive. Even though you could say that their motive for doing that, you could argue that they had good motives because of the horrible things that those prisoners, before they were prisoners, the horrible things that they did to Americans, to other people. You could say that we were justified because of the attacks on 9/11 to do whatever we wanted to them because of the horrible things they did to us. And you could argue that they were actually motivated by good ethics. You can make that argument. But most of us would agree that the act of what they did was so horrible, so demeaning, that it was not right. And we could say that for us as Americans, we don't believe that that kind of act can ever truly be justified, right? Because we want to consider ourselves to be ethically above that type of action, that type of demeaning behavior to somebody else, no matter what they might have done to us. So from that point of view, from that perspective, what they did was ethically wrong. Even though they may have had some good motivations, they may have been driven, at least in part, by the right motives. Their action was so horrible, was so demeaning and so disrespectful that you couldn't defend that ethically from a good ethical point of view. So from that perspective, the action is what was important. The action is what mattered in defining whether or not they were doing something ethically right or wrong. Now, the third aspect of reasoning is consequence. Is the consequence of this action good or bad? All right. So you can say that in our first example, the motive was right. The motive was good. The motive was ethically good. So we could defend that from an ethical point of view. In the second example, the act was actually wrong, was actually ethically wrong. It was the wrong thing to do. It was so bad and so horrible that we couldn't defend it. Now, you could say that that no matter what a person's ethical motivation is, no matter what the act is, the consequence is what matters, and that's what makes an action ethically right or decision ethically right or wrong. I would use the perspective that when I take my daughters to a doctor, and if they're going to go into surgery, I want that doctor to be well skilled, no matter what his personal motivation. He may be only driven by money, the desire to earn money, to earn tons of money. But if that doctor is going to make my daughter better, and the consequence of his surgery is going to be that she's going to be well, she's going to be healthy, then I'm okay with that. I don't need my doctor necessarily to be driven by an ethically pure motive. No, I prefer that, and if a doctor's only out for money, they may not offer the kind of care that my daughter needs, but that's not necessarily going to be the driving factor for me and my daughter. You could say that the example of Walmart to me is an interesting example, because the consequence is that we're all able to, the consequence of Walmart's kind of business scheme is that we're able to save a lot of money and get more stuff. And many of us shop at Walmart. But what's the actual consequence? What's the better consequence? It benefits us as consumers, but for people that work for Walmart, if they don't earn a livable wage, if they have to work multiple jobs just to get by, is that a good consequence? Is that an ethically right consequence? So, judging this example from an ethical point of view, or from the consequential point of view, what's really right and what's really wrong? So, in brief, we can analyze egoism using these three aspects of reason, of good reason, right? What's the motive? What's the motive behind egoism? Well, the motive behind egoism is essentially, I'm going to look out for myself. So you can make your decision. Is that ethically right, or is that ethically wrong? Altruism, on the other hand, seeks out to benefit other people. Is that more ethically right, or is that more ethically wrong? The actions that come about from egoism. So you can look at capitalism, a free market economy in which businesses thrive and many people benefit and profit, and the standard of living is better. Are the actions that people take in order to produce that result, are the actions that people take, such as in the example of Walmart, are their actions of how they treat their employees, is that ethically right, or is that ethically wrong? The actions that they take to benefit consumers, is that ethically right, or is that ethically wrong? You could say that that other businesses may do actions in order to support their own businesses, but are all the actions they take right or wrong? Okay, think of different jobs that are sent overseas. Is it right for us to do that, for businesses to thrive because they can save on labor? Is that right, or is that wrong? Or would it necessarily be better for them to keep the jobs here? Doesn't it benefit other people? Maybe is it more altruistic because it's helping business in China to thrive? Is that better? And the consequence of these types of business practices is the end result. Does the ends justify the means? Is it ethically right if the end comes out better for us all, or is that ethically wrong? What are the consequences? So, as we're examining each of these different ethical theories, I want you to keep in mind these three aspects of reasoning. What's the motive? What's the motive behind it? What's the action? Is that ethically right or wrong? And what's the consequence? Does the consequence justify the ethics behind it? So, as we continue on in this course, I hope that you will take a lot of consideration for good argumentation. If you want to argue for a particular ethical point of view, you've got to show with good evidence and good support that it's ethically right or ethically wrong. So that's going to be the focus of our course. And that's what I'm going to be looking for from you for the rest of our time. Can you argue for the benefits or the weaknesses of a particular ethical point of view based on the motive, based on the actions, and based on the consequences? How do these show whether an action or decision is ethically right or ethically wrong? So I wish you the best as we continue on this course, and we'll see you on the discussion board.